call on Senator Michael McDowell to make a statement.
I want to welcome the Minister to the House. The topic that I have put down for consideration as a commencement matter is a matter of huge importance and grave urgency. A recent Irish Times report confirmed my own impression of the private rented dwelling market, and that is that landlords are selling up. 40% of houses now on the market are landlords selling out. The reason for this is appallingly obvious, I have to say, and it comes down to this, that the government has hopelessly mismanaged the relationship of private landlords with their tenants and their properties. And this isn't a novelty. You know, the department in question in the past abolished, as best they could, bed sits and caused 10 to 12,000 people to lose their home at the bottom end of the market of the property ladder. Now we have a situation where if you let a house for more than 6 months, you cannot recover possession of that property except for 4 stated reasons. And one of them is that you want to sell with vacant possession. A second is that you want to refurbish the property, in which case you're obliged to offer it back. The third is that you're planning permission to redevelop the property. Or the fourth is that you want it for a member of your own family. Apart from that, you cannot get your property back from a tenant at the moment. All of that is compounded now by a policy initiative by Sinn Féin, which says that they want to bring about a situation whereas if you want to sell a property, you must sell it with the tenants in situ, so that anybody who's been there for 6 months can stay there effectively forever, and even the property has to be sold with them in occupation. And just in relation to that issue, you know, the tenant, the concept of tenant has been changed yet again by a colossal mistake in the department, in the Custom House thought process, to encompass anybody. So if you let a house to, say, 3 people who share it, after a while they're entitled to bring in other people and disappear themselves. So the landlord ends up with 3 people that the landlord never originally had as tenants, because the onus is on the landlord to prove or to establish a good reason why the substitute tenants shouldn't stay there forever as well. Now, this is crazy stuff, because it means that in relation to furnished accommodation, if you let out a house fully furnished, and I did once, so I know about this, and I got out of the market for the reasons that I'm now describing now. If you let out a property fully furnished to a high standard, and I did an executive let property, which was very successful, you are now saying that you'll never get the property back, and if Sinn Féin have their way, you'll never ever get the property back, and you are responsible for things like fridges, cookers, and all the rest of it that you let with the house in the beginning. So, what I want to say is this: the time has come for the government to cop onto the fact that it has driven out the landlords and tenants, and it's being helped now by Sinn Féin's helpful policy proposal. It has driven out the landlords from the private rented market. And the result is this. I mean, it may be said in relation to all of this that it doesn't really matter. If the landlord sells it, somebody will buy it. That's not a good response, because different people buy than from people who can only afford to rent. There are families who can't afford to buy for one reason or another, but they need a house to rent, to bring up their kids and all the rest of it. So, and the last thing I want to say is this. Building, if you're a big American real estate investment trust, a tower block of apartments, which you let out empty and unfurnished to people, is entirely different from being the landlord of a fully furnished house. They're entirely different situations. And if you want to know, Minister, why the landlords have left the market, it's because of government policies and nothing else. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator.
It's lovely to see you in the chair here in the Shannon. Senator McDowell, thank you very much for raising this. I'm taking this on behalf of Minister Darragh O'Brien. As you know, I'm Minister in the Department of Health, but I'm taking this here today. The Government is committed to supporting the continued participation of landlords and growing their investment in the rental market. Budget 2023 provides for a doubling of the cap on deductibility for a landlord's pre-letting expenditure for previously vacant properties to €10,000 per property. The requirement for vacancy for associated expenditure to qualify for such tax deductibility has been reduced from 12 to 6 months. Under Action 2.8 of Housing for All, the Department of Finance reviewed the recommendations of the 2017 Working Group on the tax and fiscal treatment of landlords. The Government provided further assistance to landlords under the Finance Act 2022 via Government Committee stage amendment passed in Dáil Éireann on the 23rd of November to provide a new tax deduction of up to €10,000 for landlords who undertake retrofitting work while the tenants remain in situ. The Residential Tenancies Act 2004 to 2022 regulate the landlord-tenant relationship in the residential rental sector and sets out the rights and obligations of landlords and tenants. Section 34 of the Act provides that a landlord must state a reason for the termination in any Part 4 tenancy notice of termination served, and the termination will not be valid unless the reason relates to one of the following: the tenant has failed to comply with the obligations other than the obligation to pay rent of the tenancy. The tenant has failed to comply with the obligation to pay rent under the tenancy. The dwelling is no longer suited to the needs of the occupying household. The landlord intends to sell the dwelling within the next 9 months. The landlord requires the dwelling for own or family member occupation. Vacant possession is required for substantial refurbishment of the dwelling. The landlord intends to change the use of the dwelling. To be legally valid, the landlord must also simultaneously copy the Residential Tenancies Board with any notice of termination served. Further procedures and requirements apply in the case of tenancy terminations grounded on failure to pay rent. According to the recent RTB research, the ongoing exit of smaller landlords from the market is a consequence of multiple factors, including legacy issues from the financial and property crash of 2008 and a challenging regulatory environment. The Society of Chartered Surveyors Ireland recently reported that 4 in 10 house sales in Q4 of 2022, which you refer to 40%, were due to the landlords exiting the market. This report cites the regulatory environment and low net returns as reasons for divestment. Building upon Budget 23, the Government is continuing to examine and consider the needs for any further financial measures to assist landlords. The Minister has commissioned a review of the rental sector, which will take into account the significant regulatory changes over the past several years, and the Government will continue its recommendations. The review will make recommendations on how our housing system can provide an efficient, affordable, safe and secure framework for both landlords and tenants, and I think this will be very welcome. The review will include a thematic review of the principal and relevant elements of the rental market, and its conclusion will be utilised to inform future policy direction for the rental market. The review will include a public consultation as well as targeted engagement with the various external stakeholders. Thank you.
First of all, I have to say I appreciate this is not the Minister's departmental responsibility, and I take that into account. But in fact, what has been said here is in fact a litany of confessions of failure. The reality is that there is a mass exodus of landlords from the market. The reality is that they are not being attracted back by tax concessions of the kind that have been announced. Telling a landlord that he can depreciate the fridge over a shorter period of time, or that pre-letting expenses will be more deductible than in the past, is no consolation to somebody who is losing control over their own property. And I do have to say that, the statement which the Minister has made, that the Department engages with all relevant stakeholders, including the Attorney-General and the RTB, as well as landlord and tenant representative bodies, that doesn't cut any that cuts nothing in terms of one thing I just want to say, and that is, the government has driven private landlords out of the market. It's going to continue, and what it's doing and what it's proposing to do in the Minister's statement will not end that. And the result is that less and less people will be able to rent a house, and only those who can afford to buy will be able to occupy houses right across Ireland.
Thank you, Senator.
and I will relay your thoughts and your views back to the Minister's department. And, you know, I think you have made some very valid points there, and we do know that there are many landlords exiting the market, and an awful lot of these landlords became accidental landlords. They might have inherited a house, or they might have bought a house. So an awful lot of accidental landlords who never intended being a landlord, but they just find the whole situation very difficult at the moment, and we see it across the whole country. So I'm in agreement with you there. And the point that you make is they're not encouraged to stay within the framework of what they can do. The review that I spoke about is already underway and will be progressed as early as possible, and any changes to the Residential Tenancies Act requires careful consideration, taking into account the constitutionality protected property rights of landlords. As I said, and you said as well, the Department engages with all relevant stakeholders, including the Attorney-General, the Residential Tenancies Board, as well as landlord and tenant representative bodies, to ensure that any proposed legislative change is made in a careful, fair, measured and balanced manner. But please be reassured that I will take your thoughts back to the Minister, and I know there is grave concern across government about the amount of landlords that are exiting the market. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister.